The first show on Headbangers Ball, my hair is all teased up. I've got this leather jacket that's got studs on it. This is the first Headbangers Ball. Big studs all over it and all this stuff. And I'm wearing a Germ shirt underneath it. So, Riki Rachtman. R-I-K-I-R-A-C-H-T-M-A-N, because it's always spelled wrong. Even in the metal years, it was spelled wrong. I think in music, I mean, before I was in punk rock, when I was a little kid, I liked Ted Nugent, and but I also liked Devo. I mean, I always liked all types of music. And what happened is, in between the punk rock and the rock thing, I got a job as a club DJ. And I was really good, like I was like one of the best club DJs. I could scratch, do all that stuff. That was before like everybody had DJs. We used to use these black things called records. And we didn't have a USB. And I used to DJ all the biggest clubs, and I was DJing all these clubs and still listening to rock and roll. And real quick, the way that the whole thing happened is I was into rock and roll, but I was DJing all these dance clubs, and one night, Tommy Lee and Heather Locklear came in there, and I was DJing and doing all this crazy stuff. They asked me to play their wedding. I DJed Tommy and Heather's wedding, and then it was there, in some moment of sobriety, I don't remember when, I must have thought of like, I just want to do a rock club and play just rock and roll. And that's kind of where the whole idea came up. And then me and Nikki became friends for a little bit. And then I met Tammy, you know, and I just came up with the idea of doing a rock club, you know, but it was a place that everybody could hang out. And when the Cathouse first opened in 1986, I mean, if you look at the very first flyer, the Sex Pistols are on the flyer, you know. Billy Idol's on the flyer, T-Rex, Hanoi Rocks, as well as Alice Cooper, Aerosmith, and everything like that. So it was at a time that a lot of people that were coming up in that rock scene, there were so many different flavors in the Hollywood rock scene, you know, because it wasn't just the Warrants. It was that, but it was the Guns N' Roses and the Faster Pussycats and the Joneses, and it was just like all these different types of thing, and it was great. It was great. The only people that like I remember, like when the Cathouse first opened, Slash and this guy Del James, they were like, "We're gonna go see Slayer play the Palladium," and I kind of liked Slayer, but wasn't really that in them. That was like in the early '80s, and that scene was a scene that really didn't like our scene. Like the heavy metal scene really didn't like our scene. You know, they didn't like it more than the punks didn't like it. But pretty soon everybody just. But it was good. I mean, whatever they say, like, oh, it's so decadent and this and that, whatever people say to describe what it was like back then, it was worse. It was the most, I mean, you know, you don't realize when you're in it, because when we reflect on the times back then, we don't think about how many friends OD'd. We didn't think about how many people got AIDS. We don't think about how many horrible relationships or suicides. We don't think about that. We just think this was rock and roll and sex, and it really was. But there were a lot of tight-knit families. A person described the Cathouse as a safe haven, because there were people that, like I said, there were goth people, there were everything that would hang around then, and when you went to the Cathouse, nobody cared, nobody would screw with you, you know? So it was like our safe place. And then just everybody started playing there, because I didn't have bands play there at the start. I didn't want bands to play there. Because if you have a band play a club and the band's good, then everybody's like, well, who's playing next week? And I wanted that not to happen. But when Guns N' Roses said they want to play a show, what do? You know? Pretty much what happened is Adam Curry was hosting the Headbangers Ball, and it was a point in my life that everybody I knew was in a band that was doing well. I mean, you know, when me and Tammy were roommates and I went to see Faster Pussycat play, they were okay, but they were never gonna get a deal. And I remember seeing them and I was just like, you know, it's our friends are just starting a silly band. Then I remember I saw them like, you know, a couple months later and I was like, dude, your band's really, like, you guys got good. You got really good. And what happened is everybody started getting good and everybody started getting record deals, and I didn't have a record deal. I didn't have a band. So I just created a place for everybody to hang out. And Axl was there the first night. Axl was always a huge part of the success of Cathouse. And that's not to say that Tammy wasn't, but Axl was a big part, because if Axl's going to wear a Cathouse shirt on Paradise City, that's going to be in front of gajillions peoples. And when he does shows there and stuff like that, well, we were talking at one point, and I was like, man, I wouldn't mind doing, Headbangers Ball. He's like, want me to set up a call? I'm like, okay. So I'm like, yeah, whatever. So and this was when they were like at their peak, so he called the president, Abby Konowich, I think, at MTV, and he called him up and he's like, Riki Rachtman, and I had a little bit of fame because of owning the Cathouse. Like, I made sure that it was Riki Rachtman's world famous Cathouse pretty early, so I had my name on it and nobody could fire me. And that's a tip, important tip. You'll never get fired from something that has your name. So he said, hey man, I got you an audition, we're gonna go to New York. I'm like, we're gonna go to New York? He goes, yeah, I'll take care of the hotel. And he booked us the Mayflower, and I couldn't afford, even though I was making okay money, I couldn't afford a first class ticket, and he flies first class. He's like, well, I'll fly business. If you can come up with a business, I'll take for the hotel. So I did it, and I auditioned, and I was horrible. I was horrible for the first couple of years on that show. About the time when people can tell that I was really apathetic, that's when I thought I was good, because I was just like forced to spoon out such crap sometimes. But Axl was a very big part of me getting that job, and I'm indebted to him for a lot of my career. I have a theory that most people, I think that, and I know people are going to be pissed off at me when I say this, but I think if you were in a band and you think your band didn't do well because of 3 guys from Seattle, then you're pathetic. Because, well, my band didn't do well because a lot of people were eating Ritz crackers at the time. It's like your band, and for anybody that says what killed metal was the Seattle scene, well, Soundgarden's Black Sabbath as far as I'm concerned. Alice in Chains is still a part of that scene, and Nirvana was just bitchin' punk rock. I'm the first one to say I love those old. I used to crank Bleach all the time because that was such a great record. But if you've got a scene that was killed from a small scene in Seattle, then your scene is pretty fucking weak. That's the first thing. It didn't kill it. People wanted different stuff. The thing is, when people came out with this outlandish look and all these crazy stuff, the idea is like, look at me, look at me. Well, you can't keep on saying, look at me, because pretty soon you look kind of silly. The only person that can get away with that is Alice Cooper. But if you come up and tease your hair and wearing, all this stuff, it's like, you gotta change. That's why if you look at a lot of the bands from that era, they ended up changing, which was smart, And the music did change, but I think if you listen to the early stuff that had a little bit of angst, then you went through that thing that everybody wanted to sound like. Everybody wanted to be Guns N' Roses. Everybody wanted to be Poison, because that was selling. Or everybody wanted to just be Slaughter, which was everything else. In the later 90s, I think a lot of the stuff had maybe a little more substance, but it's hard to say that the stuff, that it died, because, Guns N' Roses survived, and there's a lot of the cream. You had to be a damn good band, and there's a lot of some of those bands now that, I remember watching Skid Row next to Kerry King of Slayer, and he was like, holy crap, this band's great. The good stuff will stick around. And yes, there's good stuff that gets ignored after a while, but that's what happens in everything, in everything. Oh my God, are you talking, listen, if you look at some of the bands that I had on Headbangers Ball, that people don't realize that I had Headbangers Ball, I had the Ramones on Headbangers Ball, I had Rancid on Headbangers Ball, I had Pennywise on Headbangers Ball. So while some people were like, for me it was like, yeah, because I love those bands. But, I had a lot of those bands, so we were definitely changing, but we were also changing with bands like Mordred and bands that had DJs and stuff like that. And the first Marilyn Manson. So rock and roll had a lot of flavors, and I don't know if we were playing alternative, more than going towards a different alternative type way, I hated more when we were playing stuff that was on during the day. I mean, I don't know if we played Nelson ever on Headbangers Ball, but we might have. So there's always a time when we go back, but if you look now, 80, 90, some of these bands are bands that were 30 years ago. Now, in the 80s, we didn't really listen to bands from 30 years ago, and I know like in the early, you know, you weren't listening to bands from the 40s, and the thing is, kids are buying Guns N' Roses shirts, kids are buying Maiden shirts, kids are buying all these stuff because a lot of this stuff just sucks. And when I go to a show and it's a band of that era, I see a lot of parents and I see a lot of kids, but a lot of kids are into it. And the main reason is that these bands are good. And then there's a lot of bands that I'll watch, like LA Guns and especially Faster Pussycat, who does not look, Faster Pussycat doesn't look like the band that they looked like back then. And I think Faster Pussycat should be playing shows with bands like Avenged Sevenfold and stuff because, you know, they seem very current to me. They don't seem like a retro band. I would say the same thing about LA Guns and Junkyard and bands like that are just freaking rock and roll. Guns N' Roses, LA Guns, Faster Pussycat, that all era, these bands all work their asses off. If something isn't popular, doesn't mean it's dead. When we went to shows to go see any of those bands, there weren't a lot of people there. It wasn't dead, but it was our scene, it was great. And we didn't expect bands, you know, nobody thought Poison was gonna sell so many millions of records, and nobody thought Guns N' Roses would ever make it. We'd go see them because it was such a damn good show. We never went to go see GNR thinking, man, I can just feel they're on the start of something big. I remember when Appetite started selling records, and I told Axl, I'm like, hey, you're a top 40 band now. You guys entered the top 40, and it was all kind of funny. But so if a band isn't selling 1 million, well, nobody sells records. If a band isn't making millions of dollars, that doesn't mean it's dead, but it doesn't mean that that's a reason to give up. If you're in this to make money, forget it. In it to play music, to go out and play music and play live, and you know, there's a few bands out there that play and that are really good, you know, and they play and you build a following like you're used to, you know. Hey man, I got a new band and the first thing I'm gonna do is buy 500,000 hits on YouTube and then we made it. I'm like, no, you gotta play, and if you go to shows, if I wouldn't say rock is dead, everything is dead.